Great. So thanks a lot for the invitation. I've never been in Brazil, and I'm a little bit in Brazil now, I guess, with this talk. I have a postdoc that joined me who is from Sao Paulo, so I feel a little bit of a connection to Brazil, and maybe one day I'll be able to visit. So I'll talk about environmental sensitivity and vantage sensitivity, and let me get started with defining what I mean with environmental sensitivity. So environmental sensitivity is really a very fundamental trait that we can observe in humans, but also many other species. It is defined as the simple ability to perceive and process information about the environment. So we all function within a context. We live on the planet Earth. We live on a specific continent in a specific setting that has challenges and opportunities. And environmental sensitivity allows us to read the environment, perceive differences in the environment, specific aspects of the environment, process that information, and then act upon that. So it's really absolutely important. For example, environmental sensitivity allows us to perceive threats, to perceive potential adverse situations and then prepare and respond to those. But it's not just helpful in order to perceive threats, but also to be aware of opportunities, such as an oasis in a desert. So environmental sensitivity helps us to perceive information about our surroundings, process them in order then to respond to that. So it's really important for us to be sensitive. Anyone that is not sensitive would struggle. So therefore, do we expect that everyone has the same degree of environmental sensitivity, or might people differ in their sensitivity? Well, some evidence that people might differ in their sensitivity is provided in many psychological concepts, which when we look at different markers of sensitivity, such as specific personality traits or stress reactivity, which we consider markers of sensitivity, we do see that people differ in those, that some people have a higher stress reactivity, other people have a lower stress reactivity. They're more affected by their experiences or less affected. So therefore, the hypothesis that we work with is that some people are generally more and some people are generally less sensitive to what they experience. And this is what we've proposed, or what I proposed in that paper, but there are many theories that are focused on that observation. So let me try to summarize that, the different theories. Most of individual differences in response to sensitivity have been framed within a diathesis stress concept. According to this diathesis stress concept, two individuals may not differ in the absence of a negative influence. Their differences emerge in response to a negative influence, with some people being resilient, meaning they're not really negatively affected by the negative experience, and some people being vulnerable, so they show a decrease, for example, in their well-being or in any level or aspect of their function. So diathesis stress or vulnerability stress usually focuses on vulnerability in response to adversity. And that a lot of the research that looked at individual differences used that model. And then more recently, about 10 years ago, or maybe even 15 years ago, differential susceptibility has been proposed as an alternative model to look at individual differences. And according to differential susceptibility, it's not so much that people are resilient or vulnerable, but maybe more that the resilient people have a low degree of sensitivity and the vulnerable ones have a high degree of sensitivity. And that sensitivity is not just restricted to the experience of adversity, but also in response to positive experiences. In other words, if those two individuals would now experience something positive and they are different in their sensitivity, we would expect that the individual with low sensitivity would also benefit less from a positive influence, and that the individual with a high sensitivity, who is more negatively affected by adverse conditions, would, in response to positive influence, actually show an increase and benefit significantly more. Therefore, factors that are associated with both a heightened response to negative and a heightened response to positive experiences should be considered sensitivity factors rather than vulnerability factors. So we basically have two sides to this story of differential susceptibility. We have individual differences in response to negative experiences that is captured by the diathesis stress model. We do have lots of suitable terminology and lots of research that provides evidence for that. What was really new by the differential susceptibility model was the idea that people also differ in response to positive experiences. And we didn't really have terminology to describe that. And that's why we proposed the terminology of vantage sensitivity to describe this positive side to differential susceptibility. So according to vantage sensitivity, two people may not necessarily differ in the absence of a positive influence, but it is in response to a positive influence that we see those differences emerge. With some benefiting from the positive influence, they show vantage sensitivity, and some not benefiting, they show vantage resistance as a function of vantage resistance factors or vantage sensitivity factors. So basically, these are all models of environmental sensitivity, and vantage sensitivity is the one that describes individual differences to positive experiences. And let me just give you one empirical example. So this is a study where we measured sensitivity in 3-year-old children using an observer rating system. So this is not parent report or self-report. This was rated by psychologists and was mostly done by my colleague Francesca Leonetti. So we had a sample of almost 300 children, and we did have measures of parenting, that sensitivity measure, and we looked, in this particular example, we looked at the outcome of social competence. And what we found is that there was an interaction that fit best with vantage sensitivity rather than differential susceptibility or diathesis stress. And let me just show you the findings here. So we do have authoritative parenting at age 3, that was based on parent report, and we have social competence of the children at age 3 also based on parent report. And here are the two, for the follow-up analysis, we created extreme groups of high sensitivity and low sensitivity. And the low sensitive children, for them really, there was no association between authoritative parenting, a positive parenting style, and social competence. But for the children that had high sensitivity, they had higher social competence when authoritative parenting was higher. So those differences emerge particularly in a context of positive parenting. That's why these findings are more consistent with vantage sensitivity. Next, I'd like to talk a bit about the mechanisms of environmental sensitivity. Why are some people, some children and adults, more sensitive to what they experience? Well, most of the authors in different theories that have been proposed on sensitivity suggest that sensitive individuals have a more sensitive central nervous system on which experiences register more easily and more deeply. There are various factors that have been associated with sensitivity. There are various genetic factors, physiological factors, and psychological factors, but they all really are connected with each other, and they seem to reflect or contribute to this heightened sensitivity in the central nervous system. And there are various brain regions that might play a role here. But one that seemed to be of particular interest is the amygdala. The amygdala is a very central part of the brain. It's part of the limbic system, had a primary role in the processing on memory of emotional reactions, not just negative ones, but also positive ones. And interestingly, several of the genetic factors of the candidate genes that have been associated with sensitivity also seem to be associated with amygdala reactivity, so the function of the amygdala. And let me just give you one example with the serotonin transporter polymorphism. So there are basically, this is the serotonin transporter is a gene, and there is a polymorphism in that some people have a long version and some people have a short version. And what they found is that people with the short version of the gene, they have a higher amygdala reactivity. That means the amygdala is more responsive when challenged. In this particular sample, it was looking at people's faces that show negative emotion. We also looked at amygdala volume in a very recent study, which should come out very soon. So in this study, we looked at the size of the volume, the size of the amygdala, but also the hippocampus, but we didn't find anything with the hippocampus. We did find interactions with the amygdala here in red. So basically what we did in this study, and this is a subsample from the TED study, we looked at environmental quality in the first 9 years of life. We then had measures of the amygdala volume, which were collected between the ages of 10 and 12. And then we had teacher-reported total problems of these children at age 12. And that was a sample of about 60 children. What we found was that there was a significant interaction with the left amygdala volume. And we followed that up with these simple slopes. And as you can see here, so we have environmental quality across childhood, and we have total problems at age 12. And then we have the children with small amygdala and the children with large amygdala. These are all boys only. What we can see is that for the ones with a small amygdala, there was no significant association between the quality of the environment across the first 9 years and the total problems at age 12. But a significant correlation, association, was there for the children with a large amygdala. And the shaded area here is the regions of significance. So we tested at what level of the environmental quality does the association become significant. And it was really at the higher end, at the high quality of the environment, where this interaction became significant. In other words, children with a large amygdala are particularly responsive to higher quality. So this finding was more consistent, again, with vantage sensitivity. Maybe important to say that the environmental quality scale here was really capturing repeated measures of the parenting, parental involvement, but also socioeconomic factors, the material environment of the child. I want to just share one slide on the genetics of sensitivity. So much of the research in the last 10-15 years featured a candidate gene approach where people focus on individual genes. And many of those gene-environment interaction findings were consistent with different patterns of environmental sensitivity. But more recently, people have been adopting or understood that complex traits such as sensitivity are not the function of individual genes, but more likely the result of many different gene variants. So we talk about thousands of different gene variants. And this is a very interesting study, the first study that captured that by Rob Kears and Associates. So they created a polygenic score based on discordant monozygotic twins, quite an interesting and powerful approach. And based on that, they then tested in a separate sample of almost 1,500 children, where the children that have more of those sensitivity genes, whether they are more affected by both negative and positive parenting. And that's indeed what they found. They found a significant interaction between their polygenic score of sensitivity that included more than 25,000 different gene variants and parenting in the prediction of emotional symptoms. So here is the figure from that paper. So at the bottom, you see the standardized polygenic score for sensitivity. So at the left here, you have the people that have low genetic sensitivity. And here you have the children that have high genetic sensitivity. And here are the emotional symptoms. I think that's measured with the SDQ scale as well. And what you can see is at the lower end of genetic sensitivity, the children didn't differ regarding parenting and emotional symptoms. But the more genetically sensitive children were, the more they were differentially affected by parenting quality. In that, highly genetic children that experienced negative parenting had higher emotional symptoms, higher emotional problems, but genetically sensitive children that experienced positive parenting had the lowest problems of all. So a finding consistent with differential susceptibility. So all of this has been combined in the neurosensitivity hypothesis, which suggests that we do have many different genes that contribute to structures and functional aspects of the central nervous system that then contribute or drive this sensitivity. And in response to specific environmental influences, that could be specific negative or positive influences, we do observe specific behavioral aspects like psychological aspects or physiological aspects that have been associated with sensitivity. So the neurosensitivity brings that all together, suggests that yes, there is a genetic contribution. Most likely that will be associated with specific aspects of the central nervous system. But it's very complicated measuring the brain, and it's expensive, and it's also complicated measuring genes. And it's actually, at this stage, not possible, based on genome-wide data, to really predict an individual's sensitivity. So it's still very helpful to use phenotypes of environmental sensitivity. And the one I want to raise here is the one that has been proposed by Elaine Aron, actually in the mid-90s already, in her work on sensory processing sensitivity, which is one of the leading theories on environmental sensitivity. So she suggested that sensory processing sensitivity is a personality trait that is fairly common, and that is characterized by people having a heightened sensory sensitivity, but also to be more aware of subtleties in their surroundings. These people process experiences more deeply and are more easily overwhelmed in a highly stimulating environment. These are just a few of the aspects that describe that personality trait. So she created the highly sensitive person scale. The original scale included 27 items and was designed for adults. And over the last few years, we created brief versions for children as well as for adults, with 12 items each. And I'll show here the scale that we use for children. So these are 12 items. So that is very much based on the adult version. In the meantime, we've just got a paper accepted where we included some additional items to strengthen the psychometric properties. But we've used this scale now in many different studies and found fairly consistent findings. So let me just plug as well the online test. So this year we published a website, sensitivityresearch.com. And on that website, you will find information about sensitivity, frequently asked questions. You can link up with other researchers that do research in that area. You can sign up and become a free member, where you get access to all our measures for free. There's also blogs where we once or twice a month present new findings in a format that is also suitable for the general public. And when you click on sensitivity tests, you can choose between the 3 different tests that we have there. And here's just the example for the adult test. So this is based on the research measures that we use. This is the 12-item measure for adults. We also have the one for children, self-report, and we have the one for children based on parent report. So if you go on the website, you can do all of that and find out about your own sensitivity. Given that this, obviously, many of you will be very involved in twin studies, we've conducted and published a study on the heritability of environmental sensitivity using this scale, the highly sensitive child scale, so the HSC scale. And we used a subsample of the twins early development study, which I assume most of you will be familiar with, which is the largest twin study, one of the largest twin studies in the UK. And we had data from about almost 3,000 twin siblings, and we conducted the study when they were 17 years of age. And what we found is that we had a heritability of about 47%, which means that 47% of the differences in sensitivity. So a substantial heritability of sensitivity, but fairly similar to other personality traits. That suggests that there is scope as well to explore the genetic components in more depth, and for the genetic studies using genome-wide approaches, we will need very large samples, and that will be a bit of a challenge. There is also quite a bit of work that has been done on sensitivity groups. There have been books that have been published, particularly in the general domain for the general public, popular psychology. And the metaphor that has been picked up by many people is that people fall into two groups. That we have the dandelions, that's the majority of people, about 80%, they are generally less sensitive. And then we have the orchids, these are the highly sensitive ones, they make up about 20% of the population. Now, whenever I used sensitivity scales, whether for children or adults, I often found a normal distribution. So I've doubted whether those groups actually existed. And the proposition that those two groups existed were not really based on strong empirical evidence, at least not in humans. So we thought we need to figure out whether that's actually the case. So we tested in our data whether we do find groups. So first of all, we looked at the distribution, and we did find sort of a normal distribution. That's what we generally find. But then we applied a latent class analysis to our samples. And we did that now in many different samples. And we often found this following solution. We do find that this normal distribution can be differentiated, can be further divided into three different groups. We do basically find 30% at the lower end, 30% at the higher end, and 40% are sort of in the middle. And we did find that in undergrad students, we did find that in children, we did find that in adolescents, we did find that in samples in the UK, in the US, and other cultures as well. The proportions change, but on average, we basically find 30% at the bottom, 40% in the middle, and 30% at the high end. So basically, we do find evidence for dandelions. They make up about 30% of the population, not 80%. And we do find evidence as well for the orchids. Again, they make up 30% rather than 20% of the population. And then we have the middle group, and we had to find a suitable flower for that. And we thought that tulips might be the right term for that. So if you go on the website and you do the test for sensitivity, it will give you the mean score of our sensitivity measure, but it will also tell you whether you are a dandelion, a tulip, or an orchid. So I'm coming to the end of my talk. So I'd like to conclude with and summarize and suggest that people generally differ in their environmental sensitivity, even though environmental sensitivity is such an important trait for every single individual. People differ in their level of sensitivity, with some being more and some being less sensitive. And that has been associated with different genetic, physiological, and psychological factors. All of those most likely reflect a heightened sensitivity that is driven by the central nervous system. And there might be specific brain regions. I mentioned the amygdala as one example. There are other brain regions that have been identified. And all of this suggests that we should expect, whether we look at the effects of positive experiences or negative experience, we should expect that people differ substantially in how they respond to them, because they differ in their environmental sensitivity. And that concludes my talk. So thank you very much for your attention.